The Upanishads, translated and commented by Swami Paramanand from the original Sanskrit text, narrated by Reade. This volume is reverently dedicated to all seekers of truth and lovers of wisdom. Preface. The translator's idea of rendering the Upanishads into clear, simple English, accessible to Occidental readers, had its origin in a visit paid to a Boston friend in 1909. The gentleman, then battling with a fatal malady, took from his library shelf a translation of the Upanishads, and opening it, expressed deep regret that the obscure and unfamiliar form shut from him what he felt to be profound and vital teaching. The desire to unlock the closed doors of this ancient treasure house, awakened at that time, led to a series of classes on the Upanishads at the Vedanta Center of Boston during its early days in St. Botolph Street. The translation and commentary then given were transcribed and after studious revision were published in the Center's monthly magazine, The Message of the East, in 1913 and 1914. Still further revision has brought it to its present form. So far as was consistent with the faithful rendering of the Sanskrit text, the Swami, throughout his translation, has sought to eliminate all that might seem obscure and confusing to the modern mind, while retaining in remarkable measure the rhythm and archaic force of the lines. He has tried not to sacrifice directness and simplicity of style. Where he has been obliged to use the Sanskrit term, for lack of an exact English equivalent, he has invariably interpreted it by a familiar English word in brackets. And everything has been done to remove the sense of strangeness in order that the Occidental reader may not feel himself an alien in the new regions of thought open to him. Even more has the Swami striven to keep the letter subordinate to the spirit. Any scripture is only secondarily a historical document. To treat it as an object of mere intellectual curiosity is to cheat the world of its deeper message. If mankind is to derive the highest benefit from a study of it, its appeal must be primarily to the spiritual consciousness. And one of the salient merits of the present translation lies in this, that the translator approaches his task not only with grave concern of the careful scholar, but also with the profound reverence and fervor of the true devotee. Editor, Boston, March 1919. Introduction. The Upanishads represent the loftiest heights of ancient Indo-Aryan thought and culture. They form the wisdom portion, or Gyan Gandh, of the Vedas, as contrasted with the Karm Gandh, or sacrificial portion. In each of the four great Vedas, known as Rik, Yajur, Sam, and Atharva, there is a large portion which deals predominantly with rituals and ceremonials, and which has for its aim to show man how, by the path of right action, he may prepare himself for higher attainment. Following this, in each Veda is another portion called the Upanishad, which deals wholly with the essentials of philosophical discrimination and ultimate spiritual vision. For this reason, the Upanishads are known as the Vedanta, that is the end or final goal of wisdom. Veda meaning wisdom, Ant meaning end. The name Upanishad has been variously interpreted. Many claim that it is a compound Sanskrit word, Upanishad, signifying, quote-unquote, sitting at the feet or in the presence of a teacher. While according to other authorities, it means to shatter or to destroy the fetters of ignorance. Whatever may have been the technical reason for selecting this name, it was chosen undoubtedly to give a picture of aspiring seekers approaching some wise seer in the seclusion of an Himalayan forest in order to learn of him the profoundest truths regarding the cosmic universe and God. Because these teachings were usually given in the stillness of some distant retreat, where the noises of the world could not disturb the tranquility of the contemplative life, they are known also as Aranyakas, the forest books. Another reason for this name may be found in the fact that they were intended especially for the Vanprasthas, those who, having fulfilled all their duties in the world, had retired to the forest to devote themselves to spiritual study. The form which the teaching naturally assumed was that of dialogue, a form later adopted by Plato and other Greek philosophers. As nothing was written and all instruction was transmitted orally, the Upanishads are also called Shrutis, what is heard. The term was also used in the sense of revealed, the Upanishads being regarded as direct revelations of God, while the Smritis, minor scriptures, recorded through memory, were traditional works of purely human origin. It is a significant fact that nowhere in the Upanishads is mention made of any author or recorder. No date for the origin of the Upanishads can be fixed because the written text does not limit the antiquity. The word Shruti makes that clear to us. The teaching probably existed ages before it was set down in any written form. The text itself bears evidence of this because not infrequently in a dialogue between teacher and disciple, the teacher quotes from earlier scriptures now unknown to us. As Professor Max Muller states in his lectures on the Vedanta philosophy, one feels certain that behind all these lightning flashes of religious and philosophic thought, there is a distant past, a dark background, of which we shall never know the beginning. Some scholars place the Vedic period as far back as 4000 or 5000 BC, others from 2000 to 1400 BC. But even the most conservative admit that it antedates, by several centuries at least, the Buddhistic period, which begins in the 6th century BC. The value of the Upanishads, however, does not rest upon the antiquity, but upon the vital message they contain for all times and all peoples. There is nothing peculiarly racial or local in them. The ennobling lessons of these scriptures are as practical for the modern world as they were for the Indo-Aryans of the earliest Vedic age. Their teachings are summed up in two Mahavakyam, or great sayings, Tat Tvam Asi, that thou art, and Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahma. This oneness of soul and God lies at the very root of all Vedic thought, and it is this dominant ideal of the unity of all life and the oneness of truth which makes the study of the Upanishads especially beneficial at the present moment. One of the most eminent of European Orientalists writes, if we fix our attention upon it, this fundamental dogma of the Vedanta system, in its philosophical simplicity as the identity of God and the soul, the Brahma and the Atma, it will be found to possess a significance reaching far beyond the Upanishads, their time and country. Nay, we may claim for it an inestimable value for the whole race of humankind. Whatever new and unwanted paths the philosophy of the future may strike out, this principle will remain permanently unshaken, and from it no deviation can possibly take place. If ever a general solution is reached of the great riddle, the key can only be found where alone the secret of nature lies open to us from within, that is to say, in our innermost self. It was here that for the first time the original thinkers of the Upanishads, to their immortal honor, found it. The first introduction of the Upanishads to the Western world was through a translation into Persian made in the 17th century. More than a century later, the distinguished French scholar Anquetil Duperron brought a copy of the manuscript from Persia to France and translated it into French and Latin, publishing only the Latin text. Despite the distortions which must have resulted from transmission through two alien languages, the light of the thought still shone with such brightness that it drew from Schopenhauer the fervent words, "How entirely does the Upanishad breathe through the Holy Spirit of the Vedas! How is everyone who by a diligent study of its Persian Latin has become familiar with that incomparable book, stirred by that spirit to the very depth of his soul? From every sentence deep, original and sublime thoughts arise, and the whole is pervaded by a high and holy and earnest spirit." Again he says, "The access to the Vedas by means of the Upanishads is, in my eyes, the greatest privilege which this still young century, 1818, may claim before all previous centuries." This testimony is borne out by the thoughtful American scholar Thoreau, who writes, "What extracts from the Vedas I have read fall on me like the light of a higher and purer luminary, which describes a loftier course through a purer stratum, free from particulars, simple, universal." The first English translation was made by a learned Hindu, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, 1725 to 1833. Since that time, there have been various European translations, French, German, Italian, and English. But a mere translation, however accurate and sympathetic, is not sufficient to make the Upanishads accessible to the Occidental mind. Professor Max Muller, after a lifetime of arduous labor in this field, frankly confesses, "Modern words are round, ancient words are square, and we may as well hope to solve the quadrature of the circle as to express adequately the ancient thought of the Vedas in modern English." Without a commentary, it is practically impossible to understand either the spirit or the meaning of the Upanishads. They were never designed as popular scriptures. They grew up essentially as textbooks of God knowledge and self-knowledge, and like all textbooks, they need interpretation. Being transmitted orally from teacher to disciple, the style was necessarily extremely condensed and in the form of aphorisms. The language also was often metaphorical and obscure. Yet, if one has the perseverance to penetrate beneath these mere surface difficulties, one is repaid 100-fold. For these ancient sacred books contain the most precious gems of spiritual thought. Every Upanishad begins with a peace chant, Shantipat, to create the proper atmosphere of purity and serenity. To study about God, the whole nature must be prepared, so unitedly and with loving hearts, teacher and disciples prayed to the Supreme Being for His grace and protection. It is not possible to comprehend the subtle problems of life unless the thought is tranquil and the energy concentrated. Until our mind is withdrawn from the varied distractions and agitations of worldly affairs, we cannot enter into the spirit of higher religious study. No study is of avail so long as our inner being is not attuned. We must hold a peaceful attitude toward all living things, and if it is lacking, we must strive fervently to cultivate it through suggestion by chanting or repeating some holy text. The same lesson is taught by Jesus, the Christ, when he says, "If thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift." Bearing this lofty ideal of peace in our minds, let us try to make our hearts free from prejudice, doubt, and intolerance, so that from these sacred writings we may draw in abundance inspiration, love, and wisdom. Paramanand. Isha Upanishad. This Upanishad derives its title from the opening words Isha Vasya, God covered. The use of Isha, Lord, a more personal name of the Supreme Being than Brahma, Atma, or Self, the names usually found in the Upanishads, constitutes one of its peculiarities. It forms the closing chapter of the Yajurveda known as Shukla, white. Oneness of the soul and God and the value of both faith and works as means of ultimate attainment are the leading themes of this Upanishad. The general teaching of the Upanishads is that works alone, even the highest, can bring only temporary happiness and must inevitably bind a man unless through them he gains knowledge of his real self. To help him acquire this knowledge is the aim of this and all Upanishads. Peace chant. Om. That the invisible absolute is whole. Whole is this, the visible phenomenal. From the invisible whole comes forth the visible whole. Though the visible whole has come out from that invisible whole, yet the whole remains unaltered. Om. Peace, peace, peace. The indefinite term that is used in the Upanishads to designate the invisible, absolute, because no word or name can fully define it. A finite object, like a table or a tree, can be defined, but God, who is infinite and unbounded, cannot be expressed by finite language. Therefore, the rishis or divine seers, desirous not to limit the unlimited, chose the indefinite term that to designate the absolute. In the light of true wisdom, the phenomenal and the absolute are inseparable. All existence is in the absolute, and whatever exists must exist in it. Hence, all manifestation is merely a modification of the one supreme whole, and neither increases nor diminishes it. The whole, therefore, remains unaltered. All this, whatsoever exists in the universe, should be covered by the Lord. Having renounced the unreal, enjoy the real. Do not covet the wealth of any man. We cover all things with the Lord by perceiving the divine presence everywhere. When the consciousness is firmly fixed in God, the conception of diversity naturally drops away. Because the one cosmic existence shines through all things, as we gain the light of wisdom, we cease to cling to the unrealities of this world, and we find all of our joy in the realm of reality. The word enjoy is also interpreted by the great commentator Shankaracharya as protect, because knowledge of our true self is the greatest protector and sustainer. If we do not have this knowledge, we cannot be happy, because nothing on this external plane of phenomena is permanent or dependable. He who is rich in the knowledge of the self does not covet external power or possession. 2. If one should desire to live in this world 100 years, one should live performing karma, righteous deeds. Thus thou mayest live, there is no other way. By doing this, karma, the fruits of thy actions, will not defile thee. If a man still clings to long life and earthly possessions, and is therefore unable to follow the path of self-knowledge, Gyan-nishta, as prescribed in the first mantram or text, then he may follow the path of right action, karma-nishta. Karma here means actions performed without selfish motive for the sake of the Lord alone. When a man performs actions clinging blindly to his lower desires, then his actions bind him to the plane of ignorance or the plane of birth and death. But when the same actions are performed with surrender to God, they purify and liberate him. 3. After leaving their bodies, they who have killed the self go to the worlds of the asuras, covered with blinding ignorance. The idea of rising to bright regions as a reward for well-doers and of falling into the realms of darkness as a punishment for evildoers is common to all great religions. But Vedanta claims that this condition of heaven and hell is only temporary, because our actions, being finite, can produce only a finite result. What does it mean to kill the self? How can the immortal soul ever be destroyed? It cannot be destroyed, it can only be obscured. Those who hold themselves under the sway of ignorance, who serve the flesh and neglect the Atma or the real self, are not able to perceive the effulgent and indestructible nature of their soul. Hence they fall into the realm where the soul light does not shine. Here the Upanishad shows that the only hell is absence of knowledge. As long as man is overpowered by the darkness of ignorance, he is a slave of nature and must accept whatever comes as the fruit of his thoughts and deeds. When he strays into the path of unreality, the sages declare that he destroys himself, because he who clings to the perishable body and regards it as his true self must experience death many times. 4. That one, though motionless, is swifter than the mind. The senses can never overtake it, for it ever goes before. Though immovable, it travels faster than those who run. By it, the all-pervading air sustains all living beings. This verse explains the character of the Atma or self. A finite object can be taken from one place and put in another, but it can only occupy one space at a time. The Atma, however, is present everywhere. Hence, though one may run with the greatest swiftness to overtake it, already it is there before him. Even the all-pervading air must be supported by the self, since it is infinite, and as nothing can live without breathing air, all living things must draw their life from the cosmic self. 5. It moves and it moves not. It is far and also it is near. It is within and also it is without all this. It is near to those who have the power to understand it, for it dwells in the heart of everyone. But it seems far to those whose mind is covered by the clouds of sensuality and self-delusion. It is within because it is the innermost soul of all creatures, and it is without as the essence of the whole external universe, infilling it like the all-pervading ether. 6. He who sees all beings in the self and the self in all beings, he never turns away from it, the self. 7. He who perceives all beings as a self, for him, how can there be delusion or grief when he sees this oneness everywhere? He who perceives the self everywhere never shrinks from anything, because through his higher consciousness, he feels united with all life. When a man sees God in all beings and all beings in God, and also God dwelling in his own soul, how can he hate any living thing? Grief and delusion rest upon a belief in diversity, which leads to competition and all forms of selfishness. With the realization of oneness, the sense of diversity vanishes and the cause of misery is removed. 8. He, the self, is all-encircling, resplendent, bodiless, spotless, without sinews, pure, untouched by sin, all-seeing, all-knowing, transcendent, self-existent. He has disposed all things duly for eternal years. This text defines the real nature of the self. When a mind is cleansed from the dross of matter, then alone can we behold the vast, radiant, subtle, ever pure and spotless self, the true basis of our existence. 9. They enter into blind darkness who worship avidya, ignorance and delusion. They fall, as it were, into greater darkness who worship vidya, knowledge. 10. By vidya one end is attained, by avidya another. Thus we have heard from the wise men who taught this. 11. He who knows at the same time both vidya and avidya crosses over death by avidya and attains immortality through vidya. Those who follow or worship the path of selfishness and pleasure, avidya, without knowing anything higher, necessarily fall into darkness. But those who worship or cherish vidya, knowledge, for mere intellectual pride and satisfaction, fall into greater darkness, because the opportunity which they misuse is greater. In the subsequent verses, vidya and avidya are used in something the same sense as faith and works in the Christian Bible. Neither alone can lead to the ultimate goal, but when taken together, they carry one to the highest. Work done with unselfish motive purifies the mind and enables man to perceive his undying nature. From this, he gains inevitably a knowledge of God, because the soul and God are one and inseparable. And when he knows himself to be one with the supreme and indestructible whole, he realizes his immortality. 12. They fall into blind darkness who worship the unmanifested, and they fall into greater darkness who worship the manifested. 13. By the worship of the unmanifested, one end is attained. By the worship of the manifested, another. Thus we have heard from the wise men who taught us this. 14. He who knows at the same time both the unmanifested, the cause of manifestation, and the destructible or manifested, he crosses over death through knowledge of the destructible, and attains immortality through knowledge of the first cause, unmanifested. This particular Upanishad deals chiefly with the invisible cause and the visible manifestation, and the whole trend of its teaching is to show that they are one and the same, one being the outcome of the other. Hence, no perfect knowledge is possible without simultaneous comprehension of both. The wise men declare that he who worships in a one-sided way, whether the visible or the invisible, does not reach the highest goal. Only he who has a coordinated understanding of both the visible and the invisible, of matter and spirit, of activity and that which is behind activity, conquers nature and thus overcomes death. By work, by making the mind steady, and by following the prescribed rules given in the scriptures, a man gains wisdom. By the light of that wisdom, he is able to perceive the invisible cause in all visible forms. Therefore, the wise man sees him in every manifested form. They who have a true conception of God are never separated from him. They exist in him and he in them. 15. The face of truth is hidden by a golden disk. O Pushan, effulgent being, uncover thy face, that I, the worshipper of truth, may behold thee. 16. O Pushan, O Sun, sole traveller of the heavens, controller of all, son of Prajapati, withdraw thy rays and gather up thy burning effulgence. Now, through thy grace, I behold thy blessed and glorious form. The Purusha, effulgent being who dwells within thee, I am he. Here the sun, who is the giver of all light, is used as a symbol of the infinite, giver of all wisdom. The seeker after truth prays to the effulgent one to control his dazzling rays, that his eyes, no longer blinded by them, may behold the truth. Having perceived it, he proclaims, Now I see that the effulgent being and I are one and the same, and my delusion is destroyed. By the light of truth, he is able to discriminate between the real and the unreal, and the knowledge thus gained convinces him that he is one with the Supreme, that there is no difference between himself and the Supreme Truth. Or as Christ said, I and my Father are one. 17. May my life breath go to the all-pervading and immortal Pran, and let this body be burned to ashes. Om. O mind, remember thy deeds. O mind, remember thy deeds. Remember. Seek not fleeting results as the reward of thy actions, O mind. Strive only for the imperishable. This mantram or text is often chanted at the hour of death to remind one of the perishable nature of the body and the eternal nature of the soul. When the clear vision of the distinction between the mortal body and the immortal soul dawns in the heart, then all craving for physical pleasure or material possession drops away, and one can say, "Let the body be burned to ashes, that the soul may attain its freedom, for death is nothing more than the casting off of a worn-out garment." 18. O Agni, bright being, lead us to blessedness by the good path. O Lord, Thou knowest all our deeds. Remove all evil and delusion from us. To Thee we offer our prostrations and supplications again and again. Here ends this Upanishad. This Upanishad is called Isha Upanishad, that which gives Brahma Vidya or knowledge of the all-pervading deity. The dominant thought running through it is that we cannot enjoy life or realize true happiness unless we consciously cover all with the omnipresent Lord. If we are not fully conscious of that which sustains our life, how can we live wisely and perform our duties? Whatever we see movable or immovable, good or bad, it is all that. We must not divide a conception of the universe, for in dividing it, we have only fragmentary knowledge, and we thus limit ourselves. He who sees all beings in herself, and herself in all beings, he never suffers, because when he sees all creatures within his true self, then jealousy, grief, and hatred vanish. He alone can love. That our pervading one is self-effulgent, birthless, deathless, pure, untainted by sin and sorrow. Knowing this, he becomes free from the bondage of matter and transcends death. Transcending death means realizing the difference between body and soul and identifying oneself with the soul. When we actually behold the undecaying soul within us and realize our true nature, we no longer identify ourselves with the body which dies, and we do not die with the body. Self-knowledge has always been the theme of the sages, and the Upanishads deal especially with the knowledge of the self and also with the knowledge of God, because there is no difference between the self and God. They are one and the same. That which comes out of the infinite whole must also be infinite, hence the self is infinite. That is the ocean, we are the drops. So long as the drop remains separate from the ocean, it is small and weak. But when it is one with the ocean, then it has all the strength of the ocean. Similarly, so long as man believes himself to be separate from the whole, he is helpless. But when he identifies himself with it, then he transcends all weakness and partakes of its omnipotent qualities.